Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Monday, December 9th. If you are just tuning in, we just finished going over Juan Soto signing the richest contract in sports history. In this segment, we turn our attention to college football. The first ever 12-team college football playoff has been announced. We'll break down the bracket, who I have winning a couple of these matchups, and how we got here. But before we do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday, December 9th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into some college football playoffs here. The 12-team playoff bracket is officially set. We had our first four seeds with the bye. Now, obviously, the four conference winners. Oregon, the number one overall seed, sitting with an undefeated record, the only one remaining in college football. They defended their crown, taking on Penn State in that Big Ten championship. Their first year in the Big Ten, they take care of business. The number two seed, also with a bye, that goes to Georgia. Georgia beats Texas for the second time, and really was an ugly game. They have their backup quarterback come in, plays really solid for them. That's where they get most of their offense out of. Carson Beck just was not effective against that Texas defense. The 3 seed goes to Boise State, a super high seed for a group of 5 team that probably doesn't deserve to be at 3, but we'll get into that in a second. And the final bye that goes to one of the conference winners, that will go to Arizona State, who's playing like maybe the best team in the country right now. The final conference winner out of the ACC is Clemson. They pulled off the upset. They get the 12 seed, no bye. But talking about this a little bit more before we get into the rest of the bracket, these are teams that are ranked 1, 2, 8, 9, and 12, or 15 in the case of Clemson, right? The issue that you have now 8 and 9 seeds, these teams that aren't at the top, aren't 1, 2, 3, 4, getting buys into the next round, is something that I think needs to be fixed, right? Boise State, undoubtedly, I think in my mind, deserves to be in the playoffs. They were the best group of 5 team. They arguably were better than some of the conference champions, and I think it's a good thing that the conference champions get in. But giving them that preferential treatment, and more importantly, I think, if we're just trying to do the most simplest fix, keep the bracket basically the same, it's not the biggest deal in the world if you want to give precedent to those conference champions. That's fine with me. I like that the conference championship matters. They should at a minimum reseed, because this is something that people have been talking about all season long. They were thinking that, hey, maybe that 5 seed would be the best place to be, because theoretically you'd play the weakest conference champion at 12, which you would think would be the group of 5. Then you would go and play the number 4 seed after that, instead of going and playing the 1. And people were saying, hey, that's an easy path. That's the easiest path, to taking on to the semifinals, right? And they're not exactly wrong. Right now, as we look at the bracket, 5-12 matchup that's going to be taking on the 1 seed Oregon. That 5-12 matchup that's going to be taking on the 4 seed Arizona State, that's going to be between Texas and Clemson. And those two teams, right away, are very similar in my mind when you take a look at that, at their resumes overall. They both have struggled against good teams. The only great team that Texas has played all season long is Georgia. They lost twice to Georgia, and they looked pretty bad in both of those games. That's by far their best opponent. You can point to a Texas A&M that finished the season unranked. None of their other wins even come close to a Texas A&M, which is their closest to a good win. Now you look at Clemson, who gets in after upsetting SMU in the conference championship game, right? They get that automatic bid, but they have the same problem. This is a team that had a very easy schedule. They took care of business, credit where credit is due. They took care of business against the teams that they're supposed to beat, right? But when it came to the top teams, the best teams that they played, yes, they just beat SMU, and that's a huge boost to their resume there, but they lost when they played Pitt, or excuse me, they beat Pitt, but they lost when they played Louisville. They lost when we played South Carolina. Those two teams are their best opponents, right? This is not a Clemson team that you look at and you're scared to play, really. They have been playing good football as of late, and I like the physicality, but these two teams are a lot closer than it seems. And I think it's going to come down to which one of them is able to step up against the team that is frankly deserving of being in the college football playoffs. I'm leaning towards Texas in this one because they've just looked a little bit better, a little bit more consistent. But if Quinn Ewers continues to not be able to deal with the pressure and the physicality that a team like Clemson can provide, kind of similar to Georgia, they're going to be in a lot of trouble. So this is not an easy matchup by any sense of the imagination. And whoever wins this one, also not going to be able to just cruise into the semifinals. They're taking on an Arizona State squad that's super talented right now. They're playing like one of the best teams in the country. That's not going to be an easy route to the semifinals either. But at the 3 seed spot, Boise State, and this is, again, what people were talking about, the 6-11 seeds in Penn State at 6 and SMU at 11, now are licking their chops. They're saying, oh, we only have to go through Boise State. That's not a team to be taking lightly. Their defense has been playing really good as of late, but you also see down the stretch, the offense is a little inconsistent. As good as Ashton Jeanty is, and as much as he is a Heisman contender, Heisman favorite, however you want to put it, this team is very one-dimensional when they're taking away that first read from Maddox Madsen, right? If Ashton Jeanty doesn't get himself going, if he isn't able to break those tackles and get downfield, this is an offense that has really shown no signs of life outside of their one big workhorse guy. And that's really concerning when you're going to go up against a team either in Penn State that's super physical or in SMU that can slow you down. They're probably not going to be as big of a threat for SMU, or SMU's not going to be as big of a threat for Boise State if it gets there. But Penn State, if they end up beating SMU in the first round, is going to be a huge problem for a team like Boise State because they have those big guys that can really just out-physical that Boise State team. But talking about that 6-11 matchup, it's one of those interesting ones because on paper, you look and you say, this is probably in favor of Penn State. You look at the way that they were able to carve up that Oregon defense in the Big Ten title game. That's something that I was not expecting out of them. SMU's offense is talented. Their defense is pretty good, and they're playing really good football. But we saw what happens when they get out-physicaled in the beginning, really the first 3 quarters of that ACC championship game against Clemson. They were not up to the task. But James Franklin has really not been able to show up for big games. That's been the biggest issue for Penn State. They're 3-19 in his tenure when they play AP top 10 opponents. SMU falls in that range right there. It's a little bit concerning. Do I think that SMU is going to win this game? Probably not. But I do definitely think they're going to be able to put up a bit of a fight. Something tells me that Penn State is going to struggle because, again, they have yet to show up in one of those big games. This is the time for James Franklin to show that that's just a narrative. It's not the truth about his team. He's got to show that he can get them ready for this game. Taking up against Boise, like I said, I think Boise beats, actually, SMU if they make it there. But Penn State, I think, just out-physicals Boise, and that is a pretty easy path to the semifinals. The 2 seed is going to be Georgia. Georgia's going to be a question mark, right? They played better football when they had their backup quarterback in the game. Carson Beck, when he went down after halftime, they were just really ineffective. They ended up winning in overtime after a couple of key drives led by the backup quarterback. They're going to face the winner of they're going to face They're going to face the winner of Indiana and Notre Dame. That is an in-state rivalry that I actually am maybe the most excited to see. This game is going to be a lot of fun. You have the best run defense in college football in Indiana, a team that's only giving up 70 yards per game on the ground, taking on a Notre Dame team that's their identity. They run the ball. They're currently top 10 in the nation in rush yards per game, 224 yards per game, led by Jeremiah Love, their running back. Obviously, their quarterback transfer from Duke, Riley Leonard, is a run-first kind of guy. They can beat you through the air if you let them, but this is kind of a best-on-best kind of matchup. This is also an in-state rivalry, right? This is a rivalry that has been dormant for 33 years. They haven't played since 1991. The last time that Indiana won a game against Notre Dame was 1950. Now, Indiana's historically not been great at football. This is their best season in their history. Period. There's no questioning that. This is statistically their best season by wins, by losses. They're in the college football playoff. This is going to be a huge game. This is going to be a lot of fun. I think it's going to be a close one, but I think at the end of the day, Indiana will find a way to pull it out. I think they learned their lesson from that Ohio State game where they just got bullied. But that's going to be the key. If Notre Dame, their front four, can really get up on that offensive line for Indiana, they could cause a lot of havoc and not let Curtis Rourke get comfortable. I do think Indiana finds a way to pull this out, though. So setting up those next rounds, I think Georgia rolls over either of them, honestly. That bye is really going to help them. They get a little bit healthier. But we're setting up for Ohio State versus Texas or Arizona State. I'm leaning towards Texas in this one. And Georgia versus Penn State here, right? Penn State, again, not huge in those big game moments. I think Georgia takes advantage of that. They find a way with their playoff pedigree to get into the championship game. And Ohio State versus Texas should be a lot of fun. Again, I think Ohio State is very, very similar to that I think Ohio State's very similar to that Georgia team in the fact that they can just kind of out-physical the opponent, this one being Texas, and I think it's going to go a very similar way. A sloppy game out of Quinn Ewers and Texas, and I think Ohio State makes the finals. And I think Ohio State just has the best roster on paper. When we take a look at how it stands, I think Ohio State is going to end up winning the college football playoffs. But let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we turn our attention to the NFL. Some crazy records being broken yesterday. We'll talk about that and more coming up next here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.